So, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a quick look at what many Toronto Blue Jays fans consider the lost title of the 1980s. We're going to talk about the 1987 season for the Blue Jays when, God bless his soul, the late Tony Fernandez, who passed away earlier this week, was injured late in the season and led directly to a 7 game losing streak for Toronto, which not only cost them first place, it cost them the division. Now, that team in '87, to many, was the strongest of the 1980s for the Blue Jays. They had some very good teams in the decade. The key lineup was Ernie Witt at catcher, Willie Upshaw at first, Gard Orge at second, Kelly Gruber at third, Tony at shortstop, MVP George Bell, who played left field and had 47 homers and 134 RBIs that year. Lloyd Bowlesby had nearly a career year with 26 homers and 96 RBIs in center. Jesse Barfield hitting 28 homers and 84. At the time, considered one of the greatest outfield groups in history. And that year, Fred McGriff also kicked in with 20 homers at DH. Now, they also had a very good bench, would include everybody from Rance Mulnix, Cecil Fielder, Leslie Lariano, Manny Lee, Charlie Moore, a young Rob Ducey, and a young Greg Myers as a backup catcher. Starting pitching was tremendous. Clancy, Key, Steve, and Flanagan, and with Cerruti and Hanky, Eichhorn, Musselman, a young David Wells, Dwayne Ward. Again, a great overall team. More built like a National League team than an American League team. Now, Toronto had stayed in first place from almost the start of the season and continued to gain momentum, although they had a kind of a difficult April. By the time June came around, they had a big winning streak, which really put them in the stead to make a run. But he only really solidified himself by the time July and August came along. And before the big losing streak, they had won, which would have been a record for the team. They had won 96 games with 7 games left in the season. Now, this is where it starts very bizarre. They were at home. They had to win at least one game in a series against the Brewers to solidify, the title. Now they had played the Tigers in a 3 game, one tie against the Tigers 3 game back to back before the big collapse. The key loss to the Tigers was a 3-2 loss to the Tigers in 13 innings, and the series against the Brewers. Fernandez really hurt himself and was unable to come back. Now, Ernie Witt was also feeling the effects of injury. But when they went to Detroit, they needed to win at least one game to clinch it. and these games were nationally broadcast, and it eventually became disastrous for Toronto. Their opening game with Jim Clancy on the hill, they lost 4-3. Game 2, again, some bad defense. Manny Lee Fernandez as a substitute had some very poor innings. They lost 3-2 in 12 innings, and the Tigers clinched the title by winning 1-0 in Game 3. Larry Herndon's infamous home run, and that last 3 game series drew nearly 150,000 fans to the Detroit Stadium. It's not that Toronto really choked. You can't say they choked because things happen, but the Tigers had Toronto's number that year, and it just goes to show that you must never let your opponent back up. Now, why does that '87 team really stand out? Well, you had a hitting coach in Cito Gaston, the later manager of Toronto, was really motivating the players to seek out their best days at the plate. The team was quite young, great fan base. Exhibition Stadium work to their work to their advantage. But it's kind of bizarre that Toronto, the big key here was they couldn't beat Detroit when they needed to. They were a better team than Detroit. They were a better team than pretty well everybody in the AL East, because that year AL East, Toronto was, uh, you know, more than competitive. The problem in '85 is that they didn't have the Detroit of '84 the year before to push them, and in this case, Toronto was didn't have the killer instinct to knock off Detroit and Milwaukee, because you got to win the games in your own division. It's okay to lose 3 or 4 games against a Western Conference team or the West AL West, but you start losing in your own division, especially late in the season. No team, I don't care if it's the modern Yankees or the cheaters, the Astros, or even Boston, can you lose 7 games winning your own division late in the season and win anything, because the odds are stacked up against you. Either team chasing you is going to catch you, or the team chasing you is going to benefit from the spoiler, like the Brewers were that year. Now, the home record that year was tremendous, 52 wins at home, second best in the division. But you got to understand the AL East at the time, wasn't the split now with the Central Division. Besides the Tigers and the Blue Jays and Brewers, again they had the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Orioles, and Indians. I mean, this was AL East was death. If you could win the AL East with all the talent and all that, but it's kind of bizarre in that season. Boston had a weak team. Baltimore had a terrible team, lost 95 games. Cleveland lost 101 games, and compared to the Cleveland of the 90s, where all the young prospects were Tomei and everybody else was starting to move forward, it was kind of embarrassing. But back in the day, Exhibition Stadium was a tremendous place to see the Blue Jays, to see ALS teams, and it was the marquee CTV, ATV coverage that stood out for a lot of people. A lot of afternoon games, Don Chevrier, Tony Kubek, some great announced games. And '87 sort of was a precursor to the World Series teams of the early '90s. But if a lot of people know, the majority of the people that were on that team in '87 weren't there in '92 and '93 for obvious reasons, because Barfield wasn't happy there. Mosby had pretty well hit his hit his height. Fernandez was later traded with McGriff for Alomar and Joe Carter. But the pitching again, Henke especially, and Dwayne Ward, the tandem savers, they hadn't peaked yet, and they did peak later on. So if you have a chance, there's a lot of YouTubes about the '87 season out there, especially the key game where Manny Lee allowed the ball to go through his legs, where Toronto needed good defensive play. I think what happened when Tony Fernandez got hurt, they were thinking too far ahead. Well, he said, if Fernandez comes back, we're not going to win the AL pennant, we're not going to win the World Series. And the team was still maturing. You got to understand, this was the only 11th season for the Blue Jays, and they came somewhat close in '83. They won it in '85, but they were like overrated and underrated at the same time. There was many media out there that, because of the choke in '85, which was a choke, lost 3 straight games, and the terrible Game 7 managerial decisions there. All I can say is that if you're a Toronto fan, a lot of success of the '92 World Series titles is tied in to the lack of success in '87. They got hungry. They won several divisions after that, but '87 again, that title belonged to Toronto, and just literally a bad break, bad injury to Tony Fernandez. And Fernandez always said that that's the loss, not say the lost ring, but the lost title. And sports is funny. You play. Look at Montreal losing 4 games this year to Detroit, the worst team in the league. It just happens sometimes as rivalry. Detroit got up for Toronto. They always did. Sparky said that. They always liked playing Toronto because it was some of the best young players in the league. So again, on this February 19th, we wish you a great day. And again, if you want to check out my previous podcast on Tony Fernandez, has been posted. I appreciate all the Blue Jay fans who take time to listen to my podcast. And anyway, go Blue Jays, go! And like '87, again, a sad time for Blue Jay Nation. Have a good day.